Don't worry about it. I have a little ant sent to you, Frank, from New York City.
Thanks, my impassioned friends. My name is Frank. I'm an alcoholic. And thanks for warming them up nice for me. Thank you. I hope you noticed I smiled from time to time while I was sitting waiting to go on. Somebody once told me I look like I'm waiting for a hanging, my own. While I'm waiting to go on, I get so locked in my own where to start and what to do, my own intensity. I've always been an intense person. By the way, I love everything about this experience. I love where it is. It's one of my favorite cities. I was in New Orleans a lot drunk, and I've been in New Orleans a lot sober. And I prefer the latter, and I think the city does too. I would have been dead if I lived here because, coming out of a blackout at 10 in the morning to face the sun for a 9 o'clock meeting, you don't live long doing stuff like that. New York, they kicked you home. They got you home by 4 o'clock, or somebody's home by 4 o'clock. I don't know where we're going to go with this. It's kind of an experiment, and I hope we'll have some participation from you guys, because I think our history is very important. I think our collective history is as important as our individual history. If I forget my own story, I'm in trouble. We all know that none of us in the room who's an alcoholic has permanent remission from the disease. To believe that is spiritual arrogance, and that's not historically found out. We all know people with 10, 15, 20 years who had it and lost it. Mysteries are among us. Bill's own sponsor, the man that brought it to Bill with all the zeal in the world, all the conviction and passion to get through to Bill during an enormous alcoholic in and out of blackout, I presume, and was able to capture Bill's imagination long enough to leave the message for him, was never really to have sustained sobriety in his own life, Ebby. And we all know that. I mean, we've all heard stories where somebody at the bar gave the message to the speaker but was never able to get it themselves. Those are the kinds of things why it's necessary that I keep going to meetings, that I keep keeping my own memory green, that I have 12 steps to keep me emotionally sober. Because if I'm not emotionally sober, chances are I'm not going to stay physically sober very long. I'm going to lose my way. I always say, I remind myself, I hope this doesn't get heavy and it gets a little light here. I always say that I didn't need AA to survive alcoholism. I was alive at the end of it. A friend of mine says, every alcoholic stops drinking, Frank. It's nice to be alive when you stop. Those of us who are alcoholic in the room just happen to be alive at the end of our alcoholism. AA is about what do you do with a life you never wanted to live. Anyone who watched me drink would have said, that man wants unconscious time. That man doesn't want to experience his 5 senses. Because if I was on this drink, I was really scheming to get the next one. I drank with a thirst I couldn't quench. I couldn't get enough. Whatever I took, I couldn't get enough of them. If I smoked 1 cigarette, I smoked a pack in an hour. That kind of stuff. And that kind of thirst is what I brought to these rooms. Anyway, one day it was over for me, June 10th, 1970. I wasn't to know for years that happened to be AA's anniversary, so I didn't dare want to change that when I learned what it was. That's Dr. Bob's anniversary. And for me, like we've heard, it has been a wonderful meeting with people sharing, keeping my memory alive and igniting painful things as well as joyous things for me, this whole session. But what began for me was a process of reclaiming myself, or maybe claiming myself for the first time. And it's been a slow, full of grief, sad, happy, cheerful adventure for me. And I never know where it's going to go tomorrow. I sort of like where it is today. And I find myself often among, in the company of people I didn't know couple of hours ago, and yet an enormously powerful sense of bonding. I care about you. I want only that you stay sober and live a happy, non-destructive life. And I know you will that for me. I used to always, I used to be an envious man. I never knew that because I was generous and good, but buried under that, I always felt diminished if somebody else got raises or whatever, if they won the lottery. I always felt, well, shit, there's less, I guess. Never was clear on it. But I thought there's less of the pie for me. That somehow it was a container. And when you took your good out of it, that meant there was less for me. And I always felt diminished by somebody else's success. In AA, that's just the reverse. My heart lights up when you tell me of your successes, and this is the only arena I've ever experienced that kind of thing. So I want to do everything I can to keep that container that's Alcoholics Anonymous alive. As Edgar said, we're 54 years old, and so we haven't always been around. I'd like to talk about what was life like for the alcoholic before Alcoholics Anonymous, and how AA has evolved to what we take for granted today, if you're like me. When I walked into AA was like IBM or something. I mean, it was, and this was 1970. I just knew that you weren't supposed to drink again. I heard that at Intergroup, my first visit to New York Intergroup. They said, you're not supposed to drink anything. I thought, anything? My God, it never occurred to me not to drink anything. I knew I wasn't supposed to drink 21 double scotches. You got in trouble, but I never knew you weren't supposed to drink anything. I didn't even count beer or wine. I thought they were health foods. You're giving your liver a rest if you were on just beer and wine. And admit it. I would tell you, slow up, have a beer, for God's sake. Give yourself a rest. And crazy, as all of us, maniacal drinker. I couldn't get enough. I would meet you at the door before you got your galoshes off if you came to my house, and I'd have a drink in your hand, the size of a vase, and wanted you to do that if I went to your house. And say something like, look at Frank, I'm making your first drink. After that, you help yourself. I could rest. I knew we were going to be around a while. But if you produced jiggers and did one for you and one for me and put everything away and sat down, I was hysterical. I had chewed the ice and started nibbling on the glassware and was crazy to get out of there to get where I could have unlimited access to alcohol. That's what I wanted. And I like bars. Bars are holy places for me because I didn't have to wait on your whim. I'd go get my own drink. Kitchens are holy places, too, especially 2 and 3 in the morning. Magic was in the air in kitchens. The people who worried about American industry had left. They had to get up the next morning, whatever that meant. And the heavy hitters were there in the kitchen. We could rest and take off our ties and jackets and just sort of, reach out and get more booze. You didn't even have to get up at that point. And we were very close to it. Do you remember the times, one more drink and we could wrap it up? There was fusion in the air in those times. We were going to be together forever. Somebody I met Thursday night, I'd be saying, well, what are we going to do Friday? And where are we going to go Saturday? And what are we going to do Sunday? That kind of incredible, instant intimacy. Those are the reasons I drank. Those are what propelled my enormous self-destructive fascination with alcohol, because I never felt those things sober. As William James writes in the Variety of Religious Experience, that alcoholism is drunkenness, he calls it, is liberating, is freeing, and sobriety is confining, is diminishing. Without a drink in my hand, I couldn't say yes to life. But with a drink in my hand, I felt invincible. I could go into any bar, and as soon as I got my drink, lit up a cigarette, I was okay. I could look around and begin the kind of exchanges that real people do. I worked one time for a company, and my office was on the 25th floor. There was an express elevator to that floor. And I would watch people. I never could say a thing. Either that or I was too loud for an elevator. This is toward the end of my drinking. I couldn't trust how I was going to be. My mouth had a life of its own. Like you put cheap gas in a car in the summer and you turn it off and it tries to get away anyway. My mouth was like that. I would be, especially if I were lying. Well, anyway, I was on this 25th floor thing, and I would watch people talk. One man would say something, another man would listen, and then respond. I knew I wasn't like that. I knew that I took turns speaking, that I waited till you stopped, and then I said something. I didn't have the capacity to think over what you said and respond without an enormous amount of fear and editing and what should I say and all of that. So I was not very good at that parroting, whatever that is, or exchanging language unless I was in the drinking experience. And so life was pretty barren for me unless I was drinking. Anyway, that's the kind of person that ended up in AA. And that's what I needed a recovery program to experience. How do you survive 5 senses suddenly reporting 100% of the data to you that you never wanted to know? How do you stop from not destructing yourself cold sober? It's one thing to be maniacally self-destructive when you're drunk, but to watch yourself do all kinds of self-destructive things sober, I think is what Alcoholics Anonymous is about. Eating too much. I would have a whole quart of ice cream when I came in, and I'd eat it so fast I'd be cold and have a headache, and I couldn't tell you what the flavor was. And I'd have a sugar hangover. That kind of stuff. Or smoking 14 cartons of cigarettes and 27 cups of coffee and wondering why I'm nervous. That kind of incredible man against himself. That's what I needed a program, to give me whatever I fancied alcohol gave me. And I needed the program, since as we know, the program is not an invention of AA, as Bill always said. The programs really are basic human tools that are designed in a package that's very palatable for me and seem to be for most alcoholics. But they're universal tools for getting people comfortable with themselves and the planet around them. But what AA for me is a container where I can use those tools. It creates an environment where I'm calm enough and responsive enough and able to use what's presented me. I've been in other containers in my life, but I've been always so nervous and anxious and intimidated that I couldn't use the tools. In school, I was terrified. I was the kind of person, if called on school, I fell apart. I was terrific in one-liners. If, like in math, they said they gave the question, I could give the answer before the guy finished the question. That kind of neurotic ability to want to win, competitiveness. But if I had to stand up and recite French, I fell apart. I knew I was going to make a mistake, and I did. And when I was corrected from the floor, I'd get worse rather than better. I couldn't even get to where I started off. And that sense of dread, that humiliation, embarrassment. People say an alcoholic would rather die than be embarrassed. And that's very true for me. Pride is my biggest sin, and shame is my most powerful emotion. Shame gets my attention. Anyway, so I have a vested interest in keeping the container, whether I like it or not, because the container is the place that I can get the tools that will keep me emotionally sober. And I want to keep the container. I want to keep the container in a spirit that I'll have access to the information here. And for that, I think it's necessary that we have 12 traditions. The traditions, as I understand it, are designed to keep everything out of the room that doesn't belong in the room, to keep us collectively emotionally sober. We've all been at business meetings, our home group business meetings, where, they're an hour fight over the Oreo cookies, who's taking them or eating them or whatever. I remember once I made the mistake of putting cinnamon in the coffee. My God, you think there was rat poison that I put in. I was trying to give them a little class, They don't like class. They just want their coffee on time and without cinnamon. Anyway, we've all been through those kinds of experiences and suffering and misunderstandings and all that kind of stuff. But we need the traditions to hold us together. The second chapter of our big book writes, we are people who normally do not mix. And you look around, and that's pretty true. I remember the earlier speaker, Tom, said he went to a heterosexual housewife meeting. And that's where he benefits. I love that. A housewife from Queens has changed my life. One of the most powerful forces in my life is somebody I would never have met socially. And in a funny way, I'm most open to people who are most different from myself. If you're like me, I'm busy judging you. Because I say, well, he's about my age, and he's got this other thing, and he's got a necktie, and what's his angle, and I've got all that racket, that judgment going. But I was defenseless from a housewife from Queens. I had no experience or things to judge her on. And consequently, I was open. I could hear her and be open to the gift. And that's why anonymity is so valued. I like what the Al-Anon people read about leaving gossip away. Gossip is enormously destructive for me. Once I learn something about a person, I can't unknow it. Once you lose your innocence, you can't get it back again. And gossip can do that. Can prevent me from having access to that person as a source of information. And I think that's one of the most valuable things about anonymity, is the fact we don't know too much of that outside stuff about each other. So when we come together, there's this enormous force to get right to the point. And the point is staying sober today and trying to be happy and useful and of service to other people. That's the essence. And if we're not talking about that here, we're sort of burning up our energy and probably separating ourselves. And so the traditions are about, I think, fostering that kind of intensity and power where magic will happen. I'm going to read a little bit from the Bible, because alcoholics have been trouble to the people around them since the beginning. We're just pains in the asses to the people around. I'll read something that from Proverbs that Joe McHugh reads in the big book seminars. And it's from, those of you who are interested in that thing, Proverbs 23, verse 29. Who hath woe? Who hath sorrow? Who hath contentions? Who hath babbling? Who hath wounds without cause? Who hath redness of the eyes? They that tarry long at the wine. They that go to seek mixed wine. It goes on to say, at the last it biteth like a serpent, and it stingeth like an adder. Thine eyes shall behold strange women. Thine heart shall utter perverse things. Did we see strange sights in the bed beside us? And did I hear perverse things coming out of my mouth at a blackout? My favorite was to say, I'd come out of a blackout hearing myself scream. The scream would wake me up or got me out of a blackout. I heard, leave me alone. And then the next minute I'd be begging the person to stay. That kind of enormous conflict deep within me is what I tried tried to deal with alcohol. Going on here, it says, Ye, thou shalt be as that lieth down in the midst of the sea. Like somebody on the sea if you drink, seasick. Or as he that lieth on the top of a mast, swaying, weaving our way down the street. They have stricken me, thou say, and I was not sick. When I got sober, I found out how sick I was. I used to work out every day, and finally when I got sober, I didn't have enough energy to take my bicycle up 3 steps into the apartment, they have beaten me, and I have not felt it. You got home and all wounds the next day, and you say, what happened to me? I didn't even feel that. Automobile wreck, broken ribs, didn't even remember it. When shall I awake? And here's the payoff. I will seek it yet again. So 800 years before Christ, whoever wrote this thing, I think it was Solomon, he knew what alcoholics were. People watched us. They knew what was happening. I didn't know what was happening. Alcoholism is going through the stop signs. The nature of it is you don't see, you don't hear, you don't taste, you don't smell, you don't touch, you don't whatever. But the people around me, that's why I always think it's funny. They ask the alcoholic to tell their story. A neighbor knows more of the specifics about my coming and going than I do. Joyously, I was unpresent for most of it. And the Bible speaks of that. We think that alcoholism as a disease is a new phenomenon. People talk about the AMA recognized it in 1950 or 1970, finally as a disease, 1970. But actually, Benjamin Rush wrote about alcoholism as a disease. Benjamin Rush was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. He started medical school at the University of Pennsylvania, a very distinguished statesman and physician of his time. And he wrote that alcoholism was a disease, it was progressive, and the answer was abstinence. He was a little confused because he, like me, thought cider and beer were okay. But he certainly knew that ardent spirits were trouble, as I did. I want to just read a little bit. I hate to read at meetings, but he has some kind of an interest. He was an alky watcher, too. Here are some of the things he wrote in this paper that was published in 1785, just after our country got founded, medical paper. An inquiry into the effects of ardent spirits upon the human body and mind. And it goes on to say, and remedies for curing them. Anyway, he said, this odious disease, for which that name it should be called, appears with more or less the following symptoms, and most commonly in the order for which I shall enumerate them. Unusual garrulity. We talk too much. Unusual silence. Captious and a disposition to quarrel. 4 was uncommon good humor, and an insipid simpering or laugh. Profane swearing or cursing. A disclosure of their own or other people's secrets. A rude disposition to tell other persons in company whom they know their faults. Certain immodest actions. I'm sorry to say, this sign of the first stage of drunkenness sometimes appears in women, who when sober are uniformly remarkable for chaste and decent manners. Number 9 is a clipping of words. Number 10, fighting, a black eye or a swelled nose, often mark this grade of drunkenness. Number 11 is, I like this, certain extravagant acts which indicate a temporary fit of madness. These are singing, hallooing, roaring, imitating the noises of brute animals. Did some of you do that? Jumping, tearing off clothes, dancing naked, breaking glasses and china, and dashing other articles of household furniture upon the ground or floor. After a while, the paroxysms of drunkenness completely formed. The face now becomes flushed, the eyes project and are somewhat watery. Winking is less frequent than natural. The underlip is protruded. The head inclines a little to one shoulder. The jaw falls. Belchings and hiccup take place. The limbs totter, the whole body staggers. The unfortunate subject of this history next falls on his seat. He looks around him with a vacant countenance and mutters inarticulate sounds to himself. He attempts to rise and walk. In this attempt, he falls upon his side, from which he gradually turns upon his back. He now closes his eyes and falls into a profound sleep, frequently attending with snoring and profuse sweats, and sometimes with such relaxation of the muscles which confine the bladder and lower bowels as to produce a symptom which delicacy forbids me to mention. The point is that a lot about alcoholism was known in 1785. Somebody was watching us, and somebody kept a log of the kinds of things we do. And some of us knew that it was progressive, that you got worse. Something I didn't know when I walked in a group. When somebody told me it was progressive, I didn't know that. I thought the people in the Bowery grew up on the Bowery. It didn't occur to me that they were not far from me. I came into AA thinking I was a mild to moderate alcoholic. I knew it was a disease. And I sensed I had it for some years. I used to read the Merck manual about alcoholism. But I thought I was a mild to moderate alcoholic, like psoriasis and acne. It comes mild, moderate, occasional severe. I thought I had a mild, moderate case with an occasional flare-up. Flare-ups were arrest for drunken driving, being asked by your company to submit your resignation. That got my attention, When I couldn't get the money to finance my alcoholism, that stuff got my attention, Anyway, so lots of stuff was known about alcoholism, yet no little critical mass of people, alcoholics, got sober in those years. It wasn't until the Washingtonians came along in 1840. They came along at a time of temperance. Temperance was alive and well in the country, not unlike our own time. All this talk about drugs and all this talk about saying no to, and there's a lot of hoopla in this country about that kind of toxicity. And there was in those days, too. Our country is founded on alcoholism. The people who came over, I was running along the Riverwalk, and I was reading about the immigrants who came to this city. Prisoners from France. They sent over 800 prisoners that they didn't want anymore. Problem people came over. And if you survived the trip, well, that was okay. You couldn't bother anybody over here in the New World. And so there were problem people here to begin with. So there's also talk that the colonists who stopped off Massachusetts, at Plymouth Rock, they chose Plymouth Rock. They really had a destination for elsewhere, but they ran out of booze, And I identify with that. Wherever I ran out of booze is where I landed and searched for more. So our country has had a love affair with alcohol from the beginning. It's not surprising that we still have trouble with it today. Anyway, at one time in this country, by the way, everything I'm talking about is in AA Comes of Age, a pamphlet, AA Tradition, and how it developed, and two papers, one by Milton Maxwell, former chairman of the board, General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous, who wrote an analysis between the Washingtonians and Alcoholics Anonymous, and that paper which I got from the library on that Benjamin Rush wrote. And some remarks I'll make later on about the Oxford groups, our immediate ancestor. Anyway, I'm going to encapsulate a lot of this stuff. The Washingtonians had a meteoric rise. 6 of them started out on March 16th, 1840, in a bar, Chase Tavern in Baltimore. Alcoholics, as they often do, were talking about the temperance movement while drinking. And they elected one of their friends to go down and check out a temperance talk. And he went down and came back, and he said it was electrifying. And they all went down the next night, and they made a pact with each other not to drink again. And the 6 of them stopped that night. What's remarkable about the Washingtonian is in 1 year, on their first anniversary, they had 1,000 recovered alcoholics. 1,000 sots, they called them in those days. It took us four years to get 40 members. And they had 1,000. On their second anniversary, they had the President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, speak to them. Depending on what newspaper you read, between 400 and 600,000 sots recovered in the Washingtonian movement. That's an enormous number considering the population of the country in those days. Yet who ever heard of the Washingtonians today except people in Alcoholics Anonymous? Who read AA Comes of Age or whatever other readings. That's pretty staggering. I kind of muse whatever happened to those people. They had a lot of the same kinds of things we have today. They had weekly meetings. They had one alcoholic telling the story to others. They had identification. They were initially, the temperance movement initially was based on not using. Telling people not to drink alcohol. All of it was educational. Don't drink. They didn't have any kind of rehabilitation or recovery program for people already drinking. In fact, they were very cynical about it. They said, if we stop people from drinking now, the drunks will die themselves. So they didn't have a lot of compassion for drunks. The usefulness we had to them were being pointed at by these temperance people. If you don't sign the temperance pledge, you're going to end up like that guy or that woman. We were horrible examples for the others. Anyway, here this Washingtonian group's got going, and they went after each other and helped each other. They even had the Martha Washington group for the spouses of the recovering drunks. So they had a lot, and they knew it was a family illness. They knew a lot of the stuff that we know. They even managed to fuse prayer, the power of prayer, the same as we do in our program, with whatever available information they had on alcoholism. And it was enormously successful. Big parades in the major cities, and as I said, Abraham Lincoln spoke to them on their second anniversary, and a long speech. I saw a speech. It's got to be a 3-hour speech. They all talk long in those days. But 3-hour speech to these people about how wonderful they were. Anyway, they were darlings of the media and darlings of the temperance causes, and in 12 years somebody wrote about them. They had lost their thunder. They had lost their way. And within a short period of time, nobody ever heard of them. Another group came along, the Emmanuel groups, around the turn of the century in this country, in Boston principally. A man called Worcester, he was an Episcopal minister, and he had studied to be a psychiatrist in Europe. And he came back, and he wanted to fuse the power of science with the power of religion. And it was the time of Mary Baker Eddy, Christian Science, New Thought. There was a lot of power in doing that, because usually those two forces don't speak to each other. You're either scientific or you're religious. And you don't get along usually, because one appeals to the right hemisphere of the brain and the other to the left, and often there's no dialogue. They just argue and quarrel and fight and everything else. Well, he came up with a program with physicians who would do the diagnosing of he treated all nervous disorders. Big component of nervous disorders, of course, is alcoholism. And they had a lot of things that we had. They had physicians diagnosing, make sure there was no organic problem with this person. And they had friendly advisors, other alcoholics to help them, to guide them. They even had a club, the Jacoby Club, for a place for them to go when they weren't working, a safe place so they wouldn't get back in their own companions. And they were remarkably successful. In a short period of time, 8 to 10 years, nobody heard of them. They fell out with the media. The physicians started battling with the religious people, who was right, who should get the people. They had public quarrels and fell apart. And our own immediate ancestor, the Oxford groups. Remember, both Dr. Bob and Bill got sober in the Oxford groups, as did Ebby. The Oxford groups at one time filled the Hollywood Bowl. 27,000 people inside the Hollywood Bowl, and another 10,000 stood outside to get in. Who ever heard of the Oxford groups today but people in Alcoholics Anonymous? They started in 1920, a man called Frank Bookman. He mesmerized people. At one time, 40% of the people who were studying for the ministry at the Hartford Seminary were people he had personally touched. He was a very charismatic man. And this thing developed. I mean, people like Harry Truman were members of the Oxford group. Fiorello LaGuardia, very famous mayor of New York. Enormous number of people were mixed up. They were non-denominational. They didn't have any creed. They didn't own any buildings. They had a lot of the things we have. They would get people back into their own churches, but they just had a one-on-one early Christianity helping each other. That you could transform your life by changing your actions today. You know, that kind of magic that we have when we first come into AA, you know, the first 3 weeks when we're invincible, we can do anything. We can walk on water and we're going to save the world. That's the energy they wanted to stay in. And were successful for many, many, many years. What happened was, what initially was an anonymous group. Frank Bookman didn't want it named after himself. He didn't want Bookmanism, is what the press called it at one time. And he began to go after big names. He felt, he changed his mind and felt that if you started with leaders, everyone else would follow. So he went after the Prince of Wales and a lot of big names with his conversion experience. He even thought if he could convert Hitler, he could change the winds of war, because the world was arming toward war, and he changed the name of the Oxford groups to moral rearmament, because he felt if people could rearm themselves morally, they could avoid war. Because if you could transform a person or facilitate a transformation of a person, you could affect the war. And there's where Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob began to get nervous in the Oxford groups, because Bill and Bob were interested in alcoholics, helping other alcoholics. And Frank Bookman felt he had drunken nations on his hands. You know, that he had to deal with it at that level. And it was very true, no question about it. The world had drunken nations on the hand. But Bill, I think, had a hunch that you first have to change yourself before you can change anybody else. And that's what Carl Jung says. The real transformations of the world begin in the character of the people. Then it transforms itself into the character of the country and the character of the world, the planet. But we first must change ourselves, which is the hardest thing. It's easier to say to other people, stop doing this or whatever, my experiences, than changing myself. In any event, within a relatively short period of time, certainly by the beginning of World War II, the Oxford groups were on the decline. And AA was on the rise. And as we talked about, 54 years later, we fill huge convention centers. And we can be at pretty hotels with fresh flowers, and we can look terrific. But I have the feeling like everybody else, that if we're not careful, if we don't consider this thing fragile, we may not be around another 50 years. Because I don't think my personal sobriety is fragile. I have to be aware of certain spiritual principles on a daily basis if I'm to stay free of emotional intoxication. And I think we better be very careful collectively that we don't get emotionally drunk. If you're like me, success is more corrosive to an alcoholic than failure. You know, when I lose, I get quiet and I listen. You know, when I wasn't working, I listened the most. You know, but when I have bucks and power and the illusion of power things, I get harder to hear. It's harder for me to hear. And I think that's true of us collectively. You know, the more blessings that come, the more arrogant, spiritually arrogant we can become. I mean, already you hear reports of people driving their cars all over the lawns in the churches where we used to be guests. Often our members have the feeling we own them now. You know, because I don't know where you come from, but often in New York, I sponsor somebody who works for a church, and he says at any group meeting that the church association of the administrators of churches have, their biggest problem is AA meetings. You know, we leave cigarette burning, we spills all over. They have problems with their insurance company because we tend to ignite the place. We often have the newest people closing up the meetings, you know, so they don't notice the cigarette burning or the coffee spills or anything else. That the other people, it's flopped. Even in my turn, it's flopped. In my day, you went to the beginners meeting at 7:30 and you went to the regular meeting at 8:30. Now all the older time people go to the earlier meetings, and they leave the newest people to close the later meetings. So there isn't that kind of sponsorship that looked after things. I'm just saying this is my experience. And those are the kinds of things that once you lose people's respect, you can't get it back by a couple of colorful ads. You know, like the earlier speaker said, people stop listening to what we say and they see how we live our lives. You know, a friend of mine early on in the program said to me, "Frank, watch your feet. You know, if your feet are going to a meeting, if your feet are going toward a healing situation, you're okay, no matter what your head says. No matter what your head is saying and your mouth is saying, if your feet aren't going in the direction of a meeting, isn't going in the direction of something healing, a healing environment, you're not going to make it. You know, being present is everything. You know, and I think we have to be present to our traditions. I'm going to just briefly go through them and then open it up a little bit for the floor. As we know, the 12 steps are about our emotional stability, our emotional sobriety. And the first one outlines the problem, the first step. The problem is I'm powerless. My life is unmanageable. By myself, I can't do anything. And the second step suggests a solution. Find a power greater than myself. That I'll naturally find out a power greater than myself. And the other steps are how to get that solution. You know. And the 12th step is the result of following the other steps, which are designed to give the solution to the problem. A spiritual awakening. A fact we will see things differently. The promises will come true. And we'll see the glass as half full rather than half empty. And everybody in this room that's been around AA for any length of time has experienced that. Otherwise, you don't come back. You know, the wonderful thing about AA, I think, is that there's no funding here. If you're not getting your life transformed, you're not going to come back. If you don't see hope that the same power that allowed you to stop being enormously self-destructive as far as your drinking is concerned can't have any effect on the rest of your life, you're not going to come back for very long. You know, I always amuse people say the wrong people are coming to the meeting. I think our problem is we're not holding on to the people we have in the meeting. You know, because you saw the countdown last night. You have a lot of people under 5 years. And then there's a fall off. You know, half the average AA room is under a year sober. You know, and as somebody said, often we don't wait around long enough to get the miracle. You know, we get sober, we get clinically sober, but we never get a chance at dealing with emotional sobriety in any kind of useful way because we don't stay around. And we hear things like, don't drink and go to meetings. And that's part of the truth, but it isn't the whole truth, as we know. You know, it's don't drink and go to meetings and change everything about your life. But they don't tell you if you're like me. Because I had everything backwards. If your thinking is poor, and if you come from a genetic mass of poor thinking, a couple of meetings is not going to turn that around. You know, I know how to be crazy and sick. What I forget is how to be well and sober, you know, emotionally sober. I have a bias for emotional illness. I'll worry about something I didn't know 10 minutes ago. I can't read the New York Times, for example, because I get crazy. You know, I'm writing 10 letters. I ride a bicycle to work. I'm writing 10 letters, things I can't do anything about, all stirred up, and meanwhile I can't clean up my room. There's no energy to kind of improve my immediate territory, things I can do something about. And that way I like to, when I came into AA, I wanted to run General Motors, but I couldn't feed myself. That kind of craziness. And that's what I need a spiritual exercise for. I have to run every day or I get fatter. And if I don't have spiritual exercises, I'm going to get spiritually fat and flabby and out of condition. I didn't stay drunk on yesterday's drinking. I had to have fresh drinking today to stay drunk. And I can't stay sober and happy and useful on yesterday's spiritual awakening. The fact that I helped somebody a year ago is not going to cut it for me to feeling useful and happy in my life today. I have to do something to carry a message to somebody today. And we have joyously an unlimited opportunity for service. We haven't begun to scratch the surface of, you see that in this town. Run around here at 6:30 in the morning, and you see we haven't begun to carry a message to the people right here. I had a friend of mine in the program who went over to work for Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa sent it right back, saying, "My God, you don't have to come over here and help my stuff. You got your own stuff in New York to do." And how true. We all have our ministry to do. We don't have to go looking or wanting more people in the tent. The suffering alcoholic is in the chair right next to you. It could even be your chair. I always smile. I used to think the suffering alcoholic is the new alcoholic. But the suffering alcoholic can have 5, 15, 25 years of sobriety and be dying, bleeding to death, psychically bleeding to death. You ask an alcoholic how they are, we're always fine. Oh, we're fine, always fine. Fresh rope burns on our neck. But you ask us how we are, we're fine. We're just going to pull this through today and get home. We're the last to know if you're like me. Just the same as I was the last to know how drunk I was, I can be the last to know how sick I am emotionally until somebody says, "Hey, look at your behavior. Look at what you're doing. Seeing how you're pushing people away." And running. I have a thing. I can talk to anybody in the room except somebody I'm interested in. That man against himself. Unless I really bring God into that moment, into that situation, and bless it, and say, I'm going to try, I'm going to step out in faith and expect God to help, to go up and talk to, but make a conscious decision to turn my life and will over to God in that experience and be able to talk to somebody. I pull back rather than go ahead. My natural instincts is to live under the sink. I always smile when people say things like, do what you feel is comfortable. Well, if I waited to do what I thought was comfortable, my God, I'd never get out of bed. Life is uncomfortable, as somebody reported. The first words of The Road Less Traveled is life is difficult. It's a high-risk jungle out there. And for us sensitive people, oversensitive people, it hurts. And my natural action is to pull back, is to accept diminishment, is to live a diminished life. And I drank to live life to the max. And I want to live that kind of life sober. Otherwise, it's not worth living. I didn't get sober to live in my darkened room on a sunny day. And I know how to depress. I have a bias toward depression. I'm a known depressive. Left to my own devices, I depress. And I need a spiritual program to tip me over into a positive field of thinking. And so that's why I have a vested interest in everybody staying in this room. Because whether we like each other or not, we need each other. Because just the same as Evie at one point was able to carry the message to Bill, Bill had to be there and available to carry the message to Evie when Evie lost it. And carry it and carry it and carry it. So anyway, none of us have gotten a permanent remission. I won't go through the traditions, but I would like to read the payoff tradition, Bill's essay. By the way, these essays on the tradition are wonderful, powerful tools in the AA Comes of Age. And I just want to read, I hate to be read to at meetings, but I just want to read the payoff one that Bill talked about in the 12th tradition, the result of all the other traditions, of keeping everything out of the room that doesn't belong in the room. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. You don't have to bring in anything else from your life into the room but that. You know? And everything else you bring in diminishes, I think, the concentration of that. You know? The more defining we are of each other, the more separating we can get. You know, as I begin to describe more and more about me, I separate myself more and more from the other people in the room. When I say I'm frank and alcoholic, that's the most bonding thing I can have for most of the people in an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. Anything else is separating. I just point that out to you. That's a normal reaction. Once we start adding other components to it, we begin to pull ourselves away. And things like money don't belong here, professionalism doesn't belong here. I mean, all of the traditions, all of the things. AA has no opinion on any outside issue. And you know, we get about 1,000 letters a day at the office, and half of them are for literature orders. The others are they have a problem, and they really want you to say Gloria is wrong and Fred's right. You know, and they want that on letterhead. But that's not the way the office works. The office just points out the only thing we have to share is experience. You know, whatever the problem is, we can go. We have 1,200 subject files at the office. So any problem your group is experiencing, we go, if we don't know the answer from just being there that many years, we go to the service file and share the available information on that problem and urge you to have your own experience and report back to us. You know, because there's a basic understanding that we've never been this way before, that all of us are on the cutting edge of this thing. We have a lot of experience of the people who've gone behind us, and I think that's enormously valuable and necessary that we understand that. But nobody has been where you are in this chair here today in New Orleans. You know, you're the cutting edge. Whatever is known about Alcoholics Anonymous, useful to you today, you know today. You know, if you were to run into somebody on the way home tonight and they asked you about AA is only as informed as you are in that moment. You are Alcoholics Anonymous. Every one of us has that knowledge and responsibility that whatever it is, it's encapsulated in ourselves. It's nowhere else. You know, the newcomer that comes in is going to look to you for what you say and how you act, for all the information he'll ever need, he or she will ever need on Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, the rest of the folders, we try to hit them with a pamphlet. When in doubt, do another pamphlet. You know, when we can't give ourselves, we give a pamphlet, I think. I mean, this is my thing, you know, like popcorn, hand pamphlets. The only gift I can ever give anybody is myself. And I can't give that enough to suit me or God, I'm sure. You know, I'm still marginally successful at giving that. Let me get on with my readings of Bill before I lose my way here. Bill says on page 136 of AA Comes of Age, with nearly every tradition, much the same has happened. At first I obeyed because I had to. I would have lost my standing in AA if I had not. After a while I began to obey because I saw that the traditions were wise and right. While I conformed because it was right to do so, I still resisted inwardly. This was particularly true of anonymity. Today I hope I have come to a time in my AA life when I can obey because I really want to obey, because I really want the traditions for myself as well as for AA as a whole. Therefore, each of our 12 traditions is really an expression of the deflation that each of us has to take, of the sacrifice that we shall all have to make in order to live and work together. Dr. Bob was essentially a far more humble person than I. In some ways, he was sort of a spiritual natural, and this anonymity business came rather easily to him. He could not understand why some people should want so much publicity. In the years before he died, his personal example respecting anonymity did much to help to keep my own lid on. I think of one affecting incident in particular, one that every AA ought to know. When it was sure that Dr. Bob was mortally afflicted, some of his friends suggested that there should be a suitable monument or mausoleum erected in honor of him and his wife Anne, something befitting a founder and his lady. Of course, this was a very natural and moving tribute. The committee went so far as to show him a sketch of the proposed edifice. Telling me about this, Dr. Bob grinned broadly and said, "God bless them. They mean well. But for heaven's sake, Bill, let's you and I get buried just like other folks." A year after his passing, I visited the Akron Cemetery where Dr. Bob and Ann lie. The simple stone says not a word about Alcoholics Anonymous. Some people may think that this wonderful couple carried personal anonymity too far when they so firmly refused to use the words Alcoholics Anonymous even on their own burial stone. For one, I think not so. I think this moving and final example of self-effacement will prove more permanent worth to AA than any amount of public attention or any great monument. You know, that's the kind of stuff that gets my attention in AA. You know, the earlier speakers talked about anyone cannot drink when you're winning at life. You know, when you got the good job and you got the BMW convertible and you're going to the gym 3 days a week and you look spectacular, you're getting your goodie. What has always riveted my attention is the people in the rooms who will never win at life, and they stay sober and they try to help each other, and they stay sober and they try to help each other. People with AIDS, you know, I've sponsored a number of people who have died, succumbed to AIDS, and not one of them has drunk again. And to the end, they tried to help each other. You know, I was always the kind of person I could, you know, if you had a problem, I'd say, no big thing. You know, don't take yourself so seriously. You know, you say you killed your mother. I said, it's been done before. Shakespeare wrote about it. You know, if I had a pimple, I was inconsolable. You know, whatever happened to me was heavy. You know, and the more you tried to comfort me, the worse I got. I'd think, sure, easy for them to say. My pimple. You know. Sylvia Plath, when she died, a reviewer wrote, "Sylvia overvalued her own sorrows." And a light went off for me. I always overvalued my own sorrows. AA has been the only environment where I can lighten up. And in hearing about your sorrows, I can let go of some of mine. You know, they're no big thing. And what is the big thing here is the fact of our community. Whatever powers manifest when we come together. You know, Carl Sandburg wrote, "Whenever a society or civilization perishes, there is always one condition present. They forgot where they came from." You know, I hope I don't forget personally where I came from. You know, that I'm a desperate man out of desperate times. And I was propelled in here and held on and held on and held on. And I hope we collectively don't forget where we've come from. Because we can be in pretty rooms and attractive places that we don't forget how desperate we were when we were all could fit on around a little table in Akron, you know, not knowing who was going to perish in the next moment. We have to notice who's on the chair next to us, because they're as fragile as they were in Akron in 1935. You know, I often wonder how many thousands of people come to AA and how few stay. You know, I mean, if you've been around for a long time, I have to. People say, "Don't you remember Jody?" And they describe, and I have to stir. Yeah, I do remember. Whatever happened to Jody? Now, sometimes it's wonderful. You go to a convention and you find out Jody moved to New Orleans and it started 15 groups, you know, that kind of stuff. But often we don't see Jody again. Just never get that kind of information. And anyway, the passion and zeal that they had in 1935 is available to us today if we stay true to the principles here. And I think our job is to stay in that consciousness so that we don't lose our way. And do we have a little time? Plenty of time. Would somebody like to make a comment or suggestion or something? Want to go home early?
Frank, how did the tradition of anonymity, you mentioned that Buckman originally had it a little bit maybe in the Oxford group, but gotten away from it. How did the tradition of anonymity start off with Bill and Bob? I mean, where did they get the idea to make us anonymous?
Wonderful. James asked, where did the idea for anonymity and why did it spark Bill and Bob's imagination to give it to us? We can't overvalue anonymity. It's 50% of our name. It's funny that we're mostly assailed by our name. People don't want us to be alcoholic and they don't want us to be anonymous. And if we're not alcoholic and we're not anonymous, I wonder what we would be. We certainly wouldn't be here today, probably. Certainly not with the passion and zeal and bonding that we feel today. So I pass that observation on. But anonymity itself is very old. It comes from Greek and something that means no name. And in political times in Greece, for practical reasons, you had to, if you did a political pamphlet, you didn't want to sign it because they killed you or got after you or something. So there's a practical edge, as it is for us. And if you read the big book, the mentions of anonymity are all for practical reasons. There are too few of us. We would be overwhelmed if people knew who we were. And in the beginning, for all of us, when we come to AA, there are very practical considerations. The shame is so much, we don't want anyone to know. And so anonymity is enormous protection for the newcomer. The fact that they will never be asked who they are or any details about their life. They can be as anonymous as they choose to be here. Otherwise, I think people would stop approaching us. But what was found, I think, was as Bill points out in his writings, that along with the practical aspects of anonymity is the enormous spiritual value of it. If I say my full name, I'm metabolically different than if I just say my name is Frank. You try it yourself. Try these experiments. I'm much more informal. I'm much more available and accessible to other people if it's just Frank. The more we separate ourselves by adding other names, the more distinguished we get from each other, the more separation begins. And through the ages, the Catholic Church knew that the nuns and priests took different names, so they would leave their old identities and assume new ones. They would become new and open people by losing. So the tradition of anonymity has long been saluted and valued with people in all walks of life. The Talmud writes about the thing of doing something for somebody without any benefit expected by you. The power of that is unbelievable, because we all come into AA saying, what's their angle? Why are they trying to get me in this thing? Where does the money go? It's another big one. Where does the basket go? Follow the basket and you'll find the power, was a thought that came my head. But we're full of all these kinds of things. And to realize that people don't care anything about your outside life, they just want you to be sober, is an incredible gift. I virtually stopped lying when I came in AA, overtly lying. And I came out of the womb lying, fabricating a personality, taking some of your personality with some of yours and weaving into a package, giving people what they wanted. Because I knew what you wanted, I never knew how to be who I was. I knew how to disguise myself. I knew how to dress, I knew how to get my hair cut, I knew how to speak, I knew what books to read, I knew how to present myself, package myself, I just never knew how to be myself. When people in AA have no expectancies of you, you can be whoever you want to be. And they just say, isn't that nice? And they know you're going to change. You know, if you're this, you'll become that. You know, I tried to be a Republican in New York City when I was drinking. That's a lonely place to be a Republican. But I was driven to that kind of stuff when I was drinking. And now nobody cares what you are in AA. And another thing is, two of our traditions, two of the 12 traditions discuss anonymity. One, the 11th, is about the letter of the law, that we don't appear at the level of press, radio, and TV, full face or with our full names, because that sets us up as some kind of spokesperson for AA, that we have something the others don't have or whatever. And the other one, the spiritual foundation one, that really has the enormous impact, is 12, that there is no distinction inside or outside AA for AA members. You know, that we're all just living today by the grace of God, not being self-destructive. And we celebrate that when we come together. I love these kinds of events, by the way. Every AA meeting is a celebration. You know, that all of us have survived our own hand for another day. You know, the miracle of that astounds me when I'm into that kind of consciousness. But when we come together from all over, I saw the countdown, somebody from Hawaii and somebody from Massachusetts and somebody from, you know, Mississippi and wherever, and somebody from Scotland. I see George in the front row there. And when we all come together, the miracle seems to get even clearer for us. That funny little people from all over have gotten it. And as Edgar mentioned, I wish you all get a chance to come to your office. We're on 31st Street on Park Avenue South. We're open every day, Monday through Friday, from 9 to 4:30. We start closing up at 4:30. And I think a holy place for us is the archives. We've got 4 rooms full of the artifacts, the early writings, the early group histories, the oral histories of the early timers, memorabilia of Bill and Bob. You get a sense of we're all going to be okay. If we just hold true to the principles, we're going to be okay. And we'll be around another 54 years or 154 years. Yes?
I'm Fred.
Hi, Fred.
This is a quick, maybe it's confusion between archives and historians. I hear from old timers things about how things have changed in meetings. Things like that they didn't use to hold hands at the end of the meeting and keep coming back, and then we can keep coming back at work, come back to work, keep working. Do you track those kind of things? Is there a sense to how AA is evolving and changing over the years?
Well, all of the things you mentioned are in the last 10 years. I just know that because I've been there. And it started with holding hands. New York resisted it, as you may remember, Fred, more than once. We still have a couple of people in our group that stand apart and won't do it. But it came as a wind from the west. It started in California, as did, hi, how are you? That kind of thing started too, because that was never, when I came into AA, we never did that. Person just said, I'm Fred, an alcoholic, and began talking. And even that, Bill and Bob never said they never gave their names at all. They just started talking. No, because they knew each other. I mean, when you were small, they didn't have to do all that stuff. But we have to add on stuff. You know what I hope doesn't happen is we don't sink the damn thing adding stuff on. You know, for me, this is opinion. I hope you edit this out, James. You know, we do everything to structure out serendipity. You know, we read 20 million things in some places. We have all these rituals that there may not even be space for God if we're not careful. Because really what the magic of AA is the spontaneity out of somebody's mouth when you really see and hear the Holy Spirit. Somebody said something that startles them, and things have changed, and we all celebrate that somebody has been blessed by the Holy Spirit. And when we structure out, when we diminish that by adding ritual, you know, we're going to become another institution, maybe. You know, so we have to be very careful. That stuff can be cute. It's also an assertion, I feel, of instant intimacy. That somehow if you hug somebody and hold their hand, it's instant healing or something. And it's not my experience. Or another thing is you have to talk at every meeting. That's a big favorite. That our mouth is going to save us. I'm happy to report my observations are that the silent ones get better in just the same magnitude as the chatty ones. That it doesn't seem to have a correlation to our mouths. That the Spirit is visited on the quiet as well as the talkative. And that's nice to know and remind ourselves, because I have periods when I talk a lot and periods when I'm silent. And often when I'm most silent is when most things are happening. When nothing's happening, I can talk forever. But when everything's happening, I'm too scared to open my mouth, maybe. Someone else. Hi, George.
Hi, George. This is sort of like a futuristic question, really. How does the general service office and information feel about, say, for example, the big television thing, the big television event a few weeks ago on Bill W's life? How do they feel about that being such an open experience for the rest of it?
From the traditions, George asked how the General Service Officer intergroups felt about the Bill W. story, the ABC special on Bill. From our traditions, we don't have an opinion. It's an outside issue. We cooperated with as we will. Our archives are open to people as long as they protect the anonymity of the people involved. That we have to be open to serve people so that they have access to the information. And we don't have an opinion on what people do. I mean, we couldn't get into policing what people do. We have to trust. Sometimes we get burned. We've been burned before with authors who say they're going to follow the traditions, and they're given not so much material from the archives as personal reflections and oral histories of other people. And we get burned by it, but we still have to trust. But we're an open fellowship, it's like an AA meeting. I mean, nobody tries to edit somebody when they speak. They figure if enough people say enough things, enough time, the truth will prevail, And I like that trust. And I think the General Service Office and the intergroups I know are all working with that basic premise, guided, of course, by our traditions that we do protect our fellowship. Tommy.
On TV, alcoholics.
Hi, Tom.
On TV, the last few months have been interviews, people who break the anonymity, tell their full names, and they're alcoholics. And is that their own personal right to do that? They feel like they want to do that, so there's no anonymity.
The only thing we can share with them, Tom asked about which is becoming very serious, the number of anonymity breaks at the public level. And we all suffer by that, I think, because people get very confused. Here's an alcoholic saying this and that and the other thing. But AA can never be punitive. But I think what happens is, I'm just trusting from historically, every time people have done that, they have suffered. What taught me about my alcoholism is my drinking. I didn't get drunk on Bill Wilson's drinking. I had to have my own. And what's going to teach us about our traditions is the fact they work. Whenever, as Bill said himself, Bill broke his anonymity, as you know from reading AA Comes of Age, and he suffered. What's going to make, it's like any other rule. If it works, it works. And I feel that those people separate themselves from the body of people in AA who truly value these things. And that will change their behavior. It's like drinking again. I think they become emotionally intoxicated with themselves. They start talking I, and they lose their contact with God. It's like, I cured myself. Is really what you begin hearing, or, I'm doing this great thing. And when the ego gets involved, I think the separation and the spiritual vitality diminishes. Separation increases, vitality diminishes. Yes, my friend.
Hi, Claude. About 5 years ago,
myself to attend plans that were very told me about the preacher that wrote and said it was his opinion only. And he felt that maybe Dr. Bob and Bill going to look at the earlier people that wrote that. Is there anything that points to that?
I've not heard that. Bill talks about how, by the way, in I think it was November 1938 is when Bill in bed came up with the 12 steps. And from AA Comes of Age, he mentions that he thought the Oxford groups had 6 steps. And I'll read those to you if we got time and a minute to do that.
Yeah, we've still got about 8 minutes on the
Okay. By the way, the AA Comes of Age, like Pass It On and Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, and now the Grapevine's book, A Language of the Heart, have wonderful indexes. And you can look up steps, the old, I think it's called the old steps. And it tells where Bill got the steps from. And he remembers that the Oxford group, which of course they didn't have specifically 6 steps, but he remembered them as that. That's what he heard in the meetings for him. And one is that they admitted they were licked. Now that I've said that, I can't find them here. But the first one was we admitted we were licked, that we couldn't handle our lives together. As long as you're managing your life, you don't need steps. And it's only when you don't, like I heard the earlier speakers, what gets our attention is when our lives are really out of control. And that was the first one in the... and then the basic thing they had were all the principles we did. Trust God, clean house, and help others. The synopsis of the steps. And how do you trust God that you never knew or anything? Or what Bill tried to detail on how you get access to a power greater than yourself is by first doing a fearless moral inventory and admitting to somebody else those faults, and then becoming entirely ready, and then finally asking God, the earlier steps said, on our knees for help, and then helping others without any expectancy of reward. That's a wonderful thing. We started a thing at the office, a little subcommittee about how to foster an understanding of anonymity in the fellowship. And one of the things we got to do for ourselves is just before every time we meet, we try to do something for somebody and not get caught. And you might try that. It really gives you a sense of how powerful anonymity is. Doing something for somebody and not getting caught. Because your ego wants to be noticed. My ego wants to be noticed. Knock over a lamp on the way out, kind of thing. Someone else? Listen, I enjoy being. My friend.
My name is Brian. I'm an alcoholic.
John?
When you think about the working fairly defined level of anonymity in an AA meeting outside an AA meeting, is it okay to give your name, your full name in an AA meeting? It's not. Where I'm from in Los Angeles, and I've always heard it, and a lot of old timers say, get up at the podium and they give their full name. The reason that they do that is so that newcomers after the meeting.
That's not an anonymity break. That's not an 11-step problem. That, I think, gets into the essence of the 12th step, the spiritual value. And that's personal. It's kind of what Bill talks about, that thing I read, page 136, where you see things differently. I feel that for me to give a full name from up here would scare the hell out of a newcomer, because he would say, God, the anonymous program, they're going to expect me to give my full name. It depends on what you want. For me, I think the people are best off is not trying to reach Frank Mauser. If they got their hand on a bottle of vodka and they make one phone call, I hope they're not trying to reach just me. I hope they're trying to reach Alcoholics Anonymous. Because I don't have anything that isn't ours. You know, if they're relying on me, we're on very shaky grounds, all of us. You know, I have feet of clay, and I try to help anybody to the best of my capacity. But the only thing I have is my moment-to-moment understanding of the principles here. I think they're much better off calling the intergroup or whatever, taking little Sadie somebody on the phone and reaching out for help, because that says they really want help. I was always the kind of person, I'll take help, but it has to be somebody from the Harvard Business School with proper diction and proper packaging job, and I'd still find something wrong with them. Brown socks and black shoes. You know, who has to listen to them? You know, the more distinction, I think, the more distinction in or outside AA, the more, I think, is lessened in the power of anonymity. You know, it might have been necessary 20 years ago or 30 years ago when there weren't so many of us. But there's virtually no city in this country you can't pick up a phone and call Alcoholics Anonymous. And if they're closed in your town, you can call across country and get somebody opening, you know, or across the world. We're in 100. I just saw the big book in Russian. My God, I got to rush just sharing that with you. I mean, who would have thought in our lifetime, you know, there'd be books in Russian? You know, they printed 5,000 of them, they're half gone. Incredible. And something like 25 meetings now in Russia. I have the feeling the General Service Office is going to be in Russia in 5 years. You know, because they're powerfully spiritual people. We often are materialists, you know, in this country. You know, if we can't buy it and wear it out, we're not interested in it. You know, whereas they're powerfully spiritual to begin with over there, or seem to be. Anyway, they're doing wonderful. Hi, my friend. Hi, Deborah. Wonderful house. It's Grandma's house. They're in transition stage now, as I understand it. This is an outside thing. I'll just give you what I know or can remember. Of course, she died, and they're closing her estate. And but it's available to people to visit. They don't have regular hours yet. I mean, they're not at that stage. But we have a number you can call and say you're coming by, and if they'd like that. And their aim is to keep it open for that kind of thing. So I think the plans are to, at least at the moment, is to kind of keep it and maybe have regular hours and stuff like that so people can visit. Yes, my friend. Hi, Tommy. The tradition reads, and this is what we all have to come to some kind of understanding, collective understanding of what it means, but any two alcoholics meeting together for the purpose of sobriety without any other affiliation can call themselves an AA group. That's tradition 4, I believe. Each group is autonomous. So if you read that tradition, any two people who, if they're gay groups, they have to be able, of course, to take anybody in. I mean, they can meet, but I mean, they can't deny an alcoholic access to, my understanding anyway, a suffering alcoholic access to that meeting if they need be. But other than that, people can gather in any kind. That's a luxury we have today, that we can get, you know, brown-eyed, blue-haired people of Russian extraction can start their own meetings. You know, I think we're maybe getting too full of specificity that we'll only be meeting with ourselves. You know, but at the moment there are no other things. As long as they have no other affiliation and they're meeting for the purpose of sobriety, and they're alcoholics, they're members. That the group is open to members of Alcoholics Anonymous, alcoholics. Does that answer your question, Tommy? Yeah. Read the tradition; they're wonderful. And it's really our collective understanding of it, not mine. I mean, as Edgar pointed out, my God, I'm no specialist in anything. There are no specialists in AA or spokespeople. It's what the consensus is. We have a general service conference that meets annually in April, the last of April every year, where 91 delegates from the U.S. and Canada, including one from Louisiana, come, and that body reflects the group conscience of AA as a whole. And even that body just makes suggestions. I mean, they don't, but that body sets the tone for Alcoholics Anonymous. And what the office does is carry out that mandate in between meetings of the General Service Conference. We just reflect the deliberations of that body. And your GSR, that's why you got to get involved, because you are Alcoholics Anonymous. Your opinion counts. But you have to have an informed opinion. You have to read the stuff, just the same as you have to own your alcoholism before you really can be helpful to somebody else. You have to have a message to carry before you can carry it. And the same is true at your assemblies and your DCM meetings and your business meetings. Get as formed as you can. Read the traditions and try to bring that spirit of understanding to the meetings, because we need it. I think there's an enormous amount of stress in Alcoholics Anonymous today. You have to determine that for your own self and your own meetings. But people are pulling us a lot of different ways. And we should be aware of that force of stress. Just like I have to be aware of my own personal stress, we have to be aware of the collective stress. That suddenly things don't happen to us that happen to the Washingtonians, the Emmanuel groups, and the Oxford groups. They weren't dumb people. They weren't stupid. They had a message for the world, but they lost their way. They began to try to be other than what they were. If I were to try to be other than a recovered alcoholic who's trying to stay sober today, I would lose my way. And if we try to be all things to all people, and all this specificity, we may lose our way. I want to thank you, really, for bringing your energy, and I feel it in the room. I really felt very good. I didn't know how far we were going to get on this. I get a lot back. It's such an valuable thing for me, and to feel that mirrored back for you to me is really an affirmation of what my life's about. Because this has to come first with me, and then the rest of my life seems to have order and go where it wants to go happily. And so I feel that. I feel a lot of energy in the room, and I want to thank you for doing that. I'll give it back to Edgar. Thanks, Edgar.